Hey folks, it's Bear Gardner, and we are here with another edition of Cards Special Operations Executive, and it is time for the rotation for the newly announced winter expansion Homefront, and because this rotation is a little impactful in places, I thought I might grab some people whose faces you might recognise, lock them in the Cards SOE bunker until such time as we're done recording, and force them to give your opinions. And as it turns out, I'm lucky enough to know some fairly smart people. So, sitting down below on the screen beneath the shiny Homefront thing, we have Core. Core, why don't you give yourself a quick introduction to all of the folks watching?
Hey guys, I'm CoreData. As some of you may know, I make some content related to cards, occasionally doing deck techs and gameplay videos, as well as occasionally streaming over on Twitch. I'm relatively new in comparison to my two co-hosts here. Only been playing for what 7-ish months, but I like to think I have a relatively good understanding of the game. So hopefully I can give some insights. But I I don't know if I'm the most qualified person in this call.
That's okay, because on the subject of qualified people, I've also managed to grab JKing7. JKing, why don't you tell people who you are if they don't already know?
All right, I'm JKing7. I also do cards, YouTube, and occasionally Twitch. And I mainly focus on the competitive aspect of the game. So this is talking about decks and the best deck in the game and how to play them well, as well as covering news that particularly affects people who play the game a lot. So news about balance, news about rotation, and news about tournaments and whatnot. And I've been playing the game for 6.5 years, so I've been around the block here.
Which is interesting, because that means in the 6.5 years that you've done it, you've won exactly 50% of the World Championships, which you will never say yourself because you're far too humble. But JKing is indeed the threepeat Kards World Champion, and generally accepted by most top players to be one of, if not the best player that we have seen in the game. I'll say it because he's far too nice to do so. Guys, I am super, super grateful for you coming along and being part of this. It's going to make my life a little bit easier. In the interests of not taking too much of the poor human beings watching this time, I say too much because if you guys know us, we can all talk. If you check out the links down below, there are links to everyone's channels. Please go follow, like, and interact with everyone involved in this. I cannot stress enough at the moment how much the YouTube algorithm is being an absolute arse. And the more that you interact, the more that you engage with it, the more chance you're giving channels in a relatively small and niche world being made by passionate people a chance to actually grow. And it's kind of key at the moment because they've had a fiddle with the algorithms and it really does feed off interaction. So make sure you go and like these guys, catch them, and obviously get on board if they're ever streaming. They're always worth a one. Plus, if one of us is streaming, one or other of the rest of us is probably there because we sort of end up lurking in this weird Ouroboros circle of each other's content. All right, so we have arrived at the Soviet Union. So we've got like two main nations and some allies to go. Thank you for the marathon watchers so far. If you are watching this, wondering if there's something wrong with your eyes because suddenly we're in different positions and wearing different clothing with a different background, no, it is a completely different day. It is a completely different time. And if you can't figure out why, you've never done any recording and editing. I was not going to stay up any later last night, nor was any other sane human being. So, as we pick things up on the marathon, we have arrived, as I say, at the Soviet Union. And as per usual, the first thing we've got is the four cards that are leaving us. This time, returning to us. And this time we lead off with a card that is coming back and maybe recognizable to a few viewers. This is 5-Year Plan. Now, 5-Year Plan is a 5-cost Soviet special order, so yeah, you can run a couple of them. And it has, I have to say, one of the most pleasing numerical values in cards that I've come across. It is a 5-cost order called 5-Year Plan, which says draw 5 cards, your HQ takes 5 damage. The only thing missing from this, and let's be honest, that's because it would be very, very broken, is the ability to run 5 copies of it. 5-Year Plan has... 5-Year Plan has... What can I say? I'm easily amused. 5-Year Plan. By the way, if you are the designer who first designed this and you are the person who, like me, went, we need a 5-year plan card, and that means everything has to have 5 in it, I love you. You are my kind of human. But there is also probably something wrong with you. But yeah, I mean, 5-Year Plan, certainly in my time and JKing's time, has seen quite a bit of in and out play. It has been seen as kind of a worthwhile trade for a lot of Soviet decks, because if you're not familiar, not a big Soviet player, or have had your head in a massive hill under the sand for the last however many years, if there is one thing that Soviets have struggled for over the years, it's good draw. And 5-Year Plan has been used as a solution to that. But we're going to go a bit sideways on this. I'm going to start with the new boys' take, because I think 5-Year Plan, from a fresher perspective, will be interesting to hear, because I have the funniest feeling that both JKing and I have some history with this card. So, Core, what do you make of the return of 5-Year Plan?
I'm actually very excited for this. Now, again, my gauge in this card might be completely off, but to me, this reads like unbelievably cracked. When you look at the current Soviet decks that are seeing play, now obviously this was most likely a piece for like the self-damage deck at the time, I would imagine. But nowadays, in like Soviet Italy control, where you're very easily able to gain quite a lot of health, you have a big buffer to work with most of the time. You don't care about taking 5. This is offset immediately by just playing Attack in the Colonies, which you're like more than happy to run anyway. Just 5 cost, draw 5 is like so powerful. Prolonged Siege is 5 cost to draw 4, and that's already like pretty solid card draw. So yeah, I'm excited for 5-Year Plan. I think it's going to be pretty solid. I can see this like slotting immediately into the Soviet Italy control decks. I think this is a pretty substantial upgrade on like By the Sword, because By the Sword is so matchup dependent. Frequently, you see people just play By the Sword to draw 2, and even then, people have kind of moved away from By the Sword and have gone for Spring Offensive because it's at least consistently drawing you 2 cards. So yeah, I think 5-Year Plan is going to be like a pretty fun inclusion in control, and maybe even like in aggressive Soviet decks where you don't really care about losing 5 health because you're killing your opponent quickly enough anyway that it doesn't matter. Just like a refill later in the game. Yeah, I'm excited to play with this card. It reads insane to me, but I could be incredibly wrong.
Well, let's talk to someone who's got the longest history with the card here. JKing, how do you feel about 5-Year Plan coming back?
So I absolutely love 5-Year Plan as a card. I see why the first thought would be that this is like a self-damage card, but 5-Year Plan actually predates the existence of self-damage as an archetype by probably like a year. And when it came out, people immediately thought this was going to be a Soviet control card, and it took a while to start to be played because there was the thought of, 1, 5 cards is often too many at once. You're very often in a situation where you have like 6 cards in hand and none of them help you, and you need to draw more cards to find a piece of removal, but your only card draws 5-Year Plan, which means you're actually going to overdraw a card by playing it, as well as take the 5 damage, which in certain situations will kill you, no matter what you draw off of it. So it struggled to find its place at first, but then we reached a meta where health started going really, really high, burn started dropping off the face of the earth, and 5-Year Plan did just start to become a better and better card. And I was a very, very early adopter of 5-Year Plan. And actually, in a lot of cases, I ran 2 5-Year Plans, not with the intention of ever playing 2 in the same game, because drawing 10 and taking 10 damage is probably going to kill you on fatigue or just from regular card damage in most games. But it's the fact that you need to find one to just consistently get that huge card advantage in control matchups. And, if you have one dead card in your hand because you drew both 5-Year Plans, that's fine, because you're still getting a 5-cost draw 5, which is better than any other deck has. Now, I'm excited to try this out with Holmes, because now Soviet aggro is more viable. When 5-Year Plan came out, and for basically all of its time in Standard before it got rotated the first time, there just wasn't really Soviet aggro you could reasonably play. Now Colm and Rush does make Soviet aggro a possibility, as well as Soviets are now one of the go-to allies for Japan aggro. So 5-Year Plan as just a huge refill and you're the aggressive deck so you don't care about your health total as much is very interesting. I will say 5-Year Plan fitting into Soviet control compared to By the Sword, which as we'll get to in a second is rotating, so you're not even going to get the choice. I think it is worse in this meta than By the Sword quite substantially, because Soviets basically have one heal card, and it's not that consistent, and it doesn't heal that much when it does heal. So 5 damage is 25% of your health. Now 5-Year Plan in a meta where you're consistently healing 30 minimum is 10% of your health. And that's much more reasonable than 25% of your health in a meta with a lot of burn, and none of the burn pieces are particularly going. And Soviets are not getting back any other healing in the cards they're getting back from the reserve pool. So unless Soviets get a decent chunk of reliable healing from the expansion itself, I think 5-Year Plan is going to be played, but I don't think it's going to push Soviets particularly. I think it will just be a necessary evil replacement for By the Sword that will be incredible in some matchups and a liability in others.
Yeah, so I mean, I have recorded history on my channel with this card. In the time that this card was around and I was still playing, I ended up playing a lot of this card. And like JKing, I will say, it wasn't necessarily running decks that you would think it would be running. I did play a lot of this in Soviet Brit and Brit Soviet decks of varying degrees of depravity that may or may not have taken advantage of things like Commonwealth and some other unmentionable Soviet combo pieces. The video is still somewhere in the archives here on my channel if you want to go see me doing a tutorial on one of the most hated decks in the meta at the time. Which was doing a ludicrous OTK that if you actually could also pop Commonwealth, could actually OTK someone after they healed up to their Commonwealth point, and there's a recorded thing of me making a Sisu player very sad. But I actually like JKing. I'm really excited to try plugging this into Japan-Soviet aggro, because I think freeing up more slots from Japan to not have to run... I've been very vocal about the fact that expansion is not my favourite draw card in the game. It can brick too often. It sometimes you need to play it and it kills your tempo because you're playing it at a time when you'd really want to do something else. But if I don't do it now, am I going to get to draw? Just being able to pop a card and just go, well, gung-ho, I don't care. I'm either going to burn you down and win in the next couple of turns because I'm on aggro, or it doesn't matter that I just ate 25% of my HQ defense because I was losing anyway, is, I think, quite interesting. I do think this is... I kind of wish we weren't losing a good... Sorry, I know there's a lot of control haters out there. You can at me in the comments. The control player in me, I am very sad that we are losing in By the Sword what I consider to be one of the most situationally and certainly in board-centric metas like this, strong control cards for draw, and getting this as a replacement. What, is it too much to ask to have all of our toys? Because, yeah, the two function kind of side by side in that, as JKing has said, it's very rare, especially nowadays, because you can't just run Brit Ally and a billion tons of healing, that you're going to want to play this twice in a match. And if you do, you're probably desperate. But it's nice when you have another option, and By the Sword, as we'll talk about later, is rotating. But I'm really positive about this coming back, but I'm always positive about having a good Soviet tool added to the game. Core, you have the face of a man who has something to say.
I do want to say that we are getting Honey back. So Honey into 5-Year Plan is net even on health.
Really, I can't imagine that anyone ever who ran a lot of control decks that used Soviet and Brit was aware of the maths on that combination.
Yeah.
No.
But I mean, also, like I said, I can like this is most likely gonna be seen in this like slightly fast things as like a phony war at home, basically. Yeah, I think it's gonna be like pretty solid, at least in like mid-range and aggro decks, especially.
Yeah.
But I am excited to play this in control for sure.
Yeah, well, let's see if everything else is as exciting, because Soviets do have a history of things maybe being less exciting for them, apart from the occasional cracked elite. So, speaking of elites, it's like I planned this, and believe me, I don't. We come to Monastyr. Now, okay, Monastyr is the Soviet elite order, and this may take some depth. So Monastyr is a 5-cost elite order, and it says, destroy and replace every enemy unit with a unit from the same nation, costing 1 less, if possible. Right. Passing time, because this is not as simple as it looks, which I suspect is why JKing is chuckling. So, 1, yes, you are literally paying 5 to destroy every enemy unit on the board, which is about on par with Soviet board clears. They tend to do fairly crazy things. The drawback, of course, is that in theory you're replacing them with something from the same nation. But note, if there isn't a card from the same nation that costs 1 less, it isn't possible, which in theory means that you could also just pitch some stuff. This is a tremendously weird card, and I personally am of the hope that there might be some slight rework of this card. But I will also say it is a piece of art that I've always loved, which has made me kind of sad that I never got to do anything with it. I have tried it in Classic a few times, and I don't know. But once again, let's leave the veterans to one side and see what Core makes of this particular Soviet elite. Where does this fit, Core, in the binary Soviet elite life?
This is, well, I mean, I think we're all fairly aware that this is like unplayable garbage, right? This is like prime real estate for a rework. I don't even think it needs to be reworked that much. I'm imagining they're likely just going to change the destroy and replace with convert every enemy unit to a unit of the same nation with 1 less cost. Like that's what I'm imagining they're going to do. That's like the most straightforward thing you can do at Monastyr. But like it doesn't fix the issue with the card that it's just way too overcosted for a not very powerful effect. Like effects like this have seen play in other card games. Again, JKing, I'm assuming you were around for the time of Devolve and Hearthstone. What made Devolve so powerful was it was super cheap, it was 2 cost, and it downgraded everything by 2. And in Hearthstone, Wisp was always in the base set, so there would always be a 0 cost 1/1 that they would turn into. And it was like super disruptive, and yeah, especially in like synergy focused decks. So like if this was maybe 4 and it converted things to like cost 2 or less, like less costing 2 less, then maybe there's a world in that like which it's okay because it triggers your Novgorods and it triggers whatever else convert synergies you have. But if this doesn't get changed, it's gonna see absolutely 0 play.
Okay, JKing,
So-
I know you've probably got some things to say.
I have a few different thoughts about Monastyr. So the first off, I'll mention that Monastyr was the Soviet elite from Theaters of War, which World at War, which to paint a picture was 7 cards came out a month for over the course of 5 months, with a huge period of no cards before that and a huge period of no cards after that. And of those 7 cards, each main nation got 1 elite, and they were supposed to be very, very powerful and shake up the meta. Germany got King Tiger, which was an absolute dominant force in the meta for the following months. Britain got Elite Spitfire, which had to be nerfed, and even after nerf was still a dominant card in the meta. Japan got Audacity, one of their best cards ever printed, and Soviets got Monastyr. So yeah, that's as a Soviet specialist, that fact hurts my soul to this very day. Um, Also, just the wording on this is incredibly depressing because it could have been destroy every enemy unit, period. Replace replace with a unit of the same nation costing one less if possible, so that it would destroy things. And then if they couldn't be replaced, they would still be destroyed. Because at the moment, if you play it and there's nothing that costs less, it just doesn't get destroyed. Which in certain situations is absolutely unplayable. And the biggest one was when they nerfed they nerfed the 5th Parachute Brigade from Britain, which
Yeah.
we already looked at, from a 0-cost 1-op to a 1-cost 0-op, which meant Britain went to having no 0-cost units. And the one arguable use case of Monastyr was to have a playable card into Britain Air, which was Soviet control's worst matchup. So you could turn all of their buffed up gladiators and swordfishes into 5th parachutes that you could then clean up later. And then that changed, the nerf to 5th parachute actually made Monastyr even worse because now it just does nothing against Brit Air. There's like specific use case, and it's basically legions. And that's almost it, because there's not a lot of things that it works with Alpine, because the Italian units largely get converted back into Alpine units, and then like the 1-cost one doesn't get converted because there's no 0-cost Italian units, and it doesn't work against tokens. Once they rotated the 0-cost Soviet unit, so the light infantry can't be converted into anything. Monastyr is just an absolute hot pile of trash. And also, what I need to say about Monastyr is that there is a lot of people, like this urban legend, I don't know where it came from, but a lot of people have misattributed me saying that I thought Monastyr was gonna be cracked and one of the best cards in the game when it was announced. That never happened. You can go back and watch. I have video evidence that I said Monastyr is a very fun and interesting card that will suck and no one will play.
Yeah, has to be said. I did go back and check when someone came to me and said this, because I was like, there's because someone showed me this card and was like, what do you think? And I gave my opinions. I won't give them here, because if anyone's wondering what I think of this card, honestly, just listen to my Canadian friend, because this is a sad card. It's just sad face.
I will say I'm excited to see it rotated because, as Core mentioned, there's a lot of possibilities of reworking it with Convert. And that are just very interesting, and also probably adjusting its cost down at least to 4.
Yeah, I honestly wouldn't be surprised to see this come down to a 2 or 3 cost Convert synergy order, depending on what way they want it to go. It just seems to make sense with the theme, and would mean that the card still feels kind of, I mean, as much as you want it to feel like it originally felt like. Maybe it just feels, maybe the better way of putting it is it feels like you wish it had felt like when it had released, in that it might actually see some play. But yeah, I think it's safe to say we'd all like to see Monastyr get a little bit of a glow up, because if nothing else, I'd like to see it see some play, because again, I like the art, but yeah, not the most cracked Sov Elite we've ever seen come back in the game. Right, it's standard card time, and this is not what I was expecting. This is the 25th Infantry Regiment, so this is a Soviet standard infantry. Kind of brothel yourselves in. This is an 8-cost, 2-op cost, 6/7 guard. But it does say at the end of your turn, add a light infantry to the same front. So this is the body infantry version of, well, this is the crapper body infantry version of the armoured train. But you can run 4 of them. But even when I was helping new players take advantage of light infantry decks, this card wasn't a consideration. It's a different thing, because even though it says light infantry, and as soon as something says light infantry, everybody's like, oh my god, tokens meta coming back. Hate it. This card was never a tokens card in the first place, and I have a feeling that JKing may support me on this one. This was a control card. This is just value generation on a big guard body that does basically the same job as the armored train. I'm kind of fine, but I sort of hope it gets changed a bit, because it's not exactly doing anything special right now. JKing, thoughts on the return of the 25th?
So I have seen the 25th Infantry Regiment played before in semi-competitive decks. And what those decks looked like they were Machines of War decks. Not to be confused with War Machine decks. Machines of War was a card that said put the top Soviet infantry of your deck into play for 5 cost. So you would play a deck with 3 copies of Machines of War, and then you'd run a bunch of 25ths and the 272nd, just the most expensive 8-cost Soviet infantries in the game, and basically you would just cheat out an 8-cost Soviet infantry on turn 4 or turn 5. And that was the entire deck. And you did that, and then sometimes you won because your opponent couldn't deal with a big guy that early, and sometimes you lost. Machines of War is not in Standard right now, and it's not coming back from Standard, so I see absolutely no point for 25th to be in the game. This is actually, I think, a worse card to bring back than the vanilla Spitfire that Britain got back for their Standard. I think there are more use cases to run a 6/6 vanilla Spitfire than the 25th. This card is unbelievably awful. And I was just looking through what cards Soviets have rotated. It's difficult to find a card that is more useless that they could have brought back. Like, there's not a lot of good Soviet standards that are rotated at the moment. And a lot of them either like fit archetypes that they don't want in the game or are possibly problematic, like War Production or the Zero Cost Blitzer. But like, you know, they could have brought back the 146, the 1K3 one that gets +1/+2 if you control 3 or more units, and then that supports like a calm, aggressive Soviet deck with 5-year plan, or the 321st, or the 173rd. These are both blitz 1-drops that Soviets have. Like, they could have just brought back something that like could be interesting, even if unplayed long term, but instead they brought back possibly the single worst card they could have brought back with 0 support. If this card's not changed, I have no words.
Yep, that sounds about right. Core, so you clearly you've probably gathered the drift of JKing and I's opinion on this card. From the point of view of someone a little bit fresher to the game, do you have some sort of thing that we might have missed?
Not really. I mean, I was looking at like the first thing I thought of was, oh, maybe this is like the only 8-drop for Red Banner or Ural Factories, but no, we have we have the tank. We have the 8-cost tank that you just upgrade into every time. So this makes no sense.
I mean, this is arguably a nerf to Red Banner.
It is. Yep. Yeah, it is, because you'd rather get the tank every time.
Yeah. No, I don't think it's arguably a nerf to Red Banner. Red Banner is in a corner complaining about the existence of this card unless it's changed. Yeah, okay. Let's see if we have something a little bit better, but let's hope for a rework.
The 25th, they could make this card a 6/12, and I'm not convinced anyone would try it.
No, I'm with you. I honestly don't think you could change the stats in a meaningful enough way that anybody's going to put this in a deck. It really is. And if you're all wondering, like, looking at this, because sometimes we do say things like, sometimes having a big body, it can be a good thing, but it's 8 cost. But by the time you're even thinking about doing anything with this card, it's miraculously not relevant. And nobody wants to print light infantry at the moment. But let's see if there's something better to look for, and we'll just hope for reworking. So, this is another card where I'm going to do a quick summary, then I'm going to start with Core, then I'm going to come to JKing and I, because I know for a fact both of us have history for this card. This is the return of the Bryansk Irregulars. This is a somewhat noteworthy Soviet limited card. It is a 2-cost, 1-op cost, 0/6 guard infantry that says, destruction. Deal 3 damage to each unit that dealt damage to this unit this turn. Core, before we go anywhere near the two old guys, I'm curious as to what you make of Bryansk Irregulars.
I mean, on the surface, this reads really, really good. Like, if you play this on turn 2 versus aggro, you're forcing them into a situation of either they lose their entire board by trading into it because it just blows everything up, or they like skip 2 turns while like single like very gently trading into this. But then you remember that suppression exists, and it's suppression like kind of completely makes its card pointless for the most part. Now, obviously, not every deck has access to suppression. Japan Soviet doesn't really have suppression. Japan France doesn't really have suppression unless you're running Sally. Regular old Jagro isn't seeing all that much play, but then like you have like these aggressive Brewster decks and stuff that this would be pretty good against, but they're just running GRS. So I don't know. It again, on the surface, this reads as like a fantastic anti-aggro unit. 0-6 for 2 is like insane health, and the fact that it can just deal 3 to whatever trades into it that turn is also great. But it's in a world where we have so much suppression, like even the Fokker and stuff is this. I don't know. This just loses to too many things incidentally. That I just don't know if it's gonna be good enough. Again, in the chain home deck, this is gonna be sick, but outside of that, I don't really know.
JKing, let's come to someone who definitely has a sizable history with seeing this card in play in many forms, I suspect.
Yeah, so it's very interesting, Cord, to hear you say that this card looks insane, and then say like the drawback is suppress, because when this card came out, suppress didn't exist. But everybody kind of thought this card was mediocre at first, and it took a long time for anybody to start to try it out. And once people started trying it out, it snowballed very quickly into Bryansk being a 3-of in pretty much every single Soviet deck. You even saw this in like tokens sometimes, because you just want to protect your 2 tokens on the board. It's a cheap thing to throw out early if you just have a slow hand against aggro. And it's incredible because I think everybody looked at this and said, well, 5th Brigade is a card, which is the 1/5 guard for Britain. And nobody's played that since 2019. And Bryansk Irregulars, you play it, and then they hit it for 5, and then on the next turn, they like ping it for 1, or they sacrifice their smallest unit into it. But I think what a lot of people forgot is that you can still attack with Bryansk Irregulars. So if they put it down to 1, you can then spend 1 credit to hit Bryansk Irregulars into their biggest unit in the front line, and then deal 3 damage to that unit. Now, obviously, suppress existing makes this worse. I don't think it's as much of an issue for Soviets, because if you play Bryansk on 2 and they suppress it, I think you're overall happy, because you've played Soviets, you probably have 845ths and sickles and maybe rushes, maybe like a defensive Kolm. And, you know, it's not like Bryansk is your only early game. If Bryansk is your only early game, you failed in the deck building stage. So if you play Bryansk on turn 2 and then they spend like a credit suppressing this, or maybe even they duress it for free, they're still going down a card on that. But more importantly, that's a suppress that is no longer in their hand. That means when you play down the turn 5 train, they might not have a second suppress. Or when you play down, they maybe suppress the train, but now they're not going to have a suppress for the turn 6 Corson, or they might not have a suppress for like whatever other guard that you're playing in the deck. Soviets are built with so many cards that are good to suppress, and there's a lot of decks that have 4 suppressions, but there's basically no deck that has more than 4 abilities to suppress a card. And Soviets have way more than 4 cards you are willing to suppress. So I think if they suppress your Bryansk, you're actually kind of fine with it, because it means they're not suppressing 845, so you get the healing. They're not suppressing like train, so you get a bigger guard. So I think Bryansk is still just going to be like an immediate auto include into the deck, and it's actually absolutely insane with HMS Formidable, because the destruction effect, like if this hits, even if it doesn't have to kill everything, because if this just hits a unit that say like, I don't know, like a 3/9, like they have the that huge British elite, the 310 guy, and you make Bryansk into a 6/6, and it fights everything, and it hits a bunch of stuff, and it hits the 3/9, and it dies, and the 3/9 goes to 3/3, but then the destruction effect triggers, and everything that didn't die to the initial fight then takes an additional 3 damage. Yeah, Bryansk is gonna be, I think, just go straight back to seeing a ton of play in a ton of decks, and I think that's gonna help Soviets once again be anti-aggro giant. However, it's not going to help whatsoever against like German control. So hopefully German control is taking enough of a beating that it falls out of the meta a bit and gives Soviets time to shine. Because otherwise you're just going to play Bryansk and then they're going to race with Salamander.
Yeah, I have to say, I am happy to see this card back because I have had a lot of fun with this card in the past because I like me some control decks and I love me the ability to take tempo off of my opponent. And this card can be the ultimate tempo thief because no matter how you end up dealing with it, and as JKing says, even with suppression in the game or removal in the game, as was back then, every time you see your opponent use a powerful tool, whether it be removal, which was the way to deal with this before, or suppression now, what you're thinking is, I've got 2 more of these in my deck. They all cost me 2, and how many good tools do you have to deal with the Soviet elite pool, which is mostly entirely in my deck anyway? So I'm interested, and yeah, I too have been interested to play around with the crazy attack thing where this effectively says, fling this around the board, deal 9 damage to everything that it hits, see if it survives. But yeah, I honestly think this will see play. I do agree, though, it is going to depend on whether Soviets can kind of reclaim their place as king of the slower, more control deck from Germany, which honestly didn't just steal it, they kind of ganged up on the Soviets in a darkened alley, beat them half to death, and then ran off with everything that they owned. And then went, by the way, we've got some friends in America that make everything that you own better. Buy now. I want to see that change because it's never to me what Germany's been. But we talked about that back in Germany. Or forward in Germany, because you might watch this in a different order. You do you. But yeah, I'm quite excited to see this back in the game, just as it is. I think it could come back and be fun. So those are the returning parts of Soviet, and now we get to the stuff that's leaving, and we do start with a card we've already kind of talked about. This is By the Sword. This is the 4-cost Soviet special order that says draw cards equal to the number of enemy units on the battlefield. This also has to sit somewhere on my kind of top 20, maybe even top 10 cards that I've had new players try and get me to explain why on earth I have recommended putting this in decks, because they're like, but, and this is one of those cards that is really good if you know how to use it, and then if you don't know how to use it, bluntly, learn, because you're kind of doing it wrong. And if you're playing heavy control decks, which is where this did tend to see quite a lot of play, you sort of need to know what you're doing in cards to win, because there are quite a few good aggro decks out there that maybe have a lower skill ceiling at times. You can at me, I'm sure you will. I know there are many people who would argue this point, but control has always been that place. I am, as I said, I'd said it before, I'm kind of sad to see this go. JKing, I know you've played a ton of this card as well. It's a bit sad to see it leaving us.
Yeah, I spoke in the Japan video about how I wasn't a fan of them rotating out these like tiny, like just small pockets of just different playstyles, like different tech cards. And in a similar vein, I'm not a fan of them rotating out a card that serves a role in a deck and being like, well, we brought back a different card that serves that same role in that same deck, so it's fine. Like in this case, they brought back 5-year plan, they're rotating By the Sword. They're like, well, Soviets still have a special draw. And that's true, but it's fun to have variety. It's fun to have a choice when you go to the deck building stage, rather than just say, I need card draw, I will put in the 1 card draw card in standard for Soviets. So I don't think it was like, we want to bring back 5-year plan, so we have to cut By the Sword. Because no deck is probably going to be running like 2 of each of those cards. So I think the thought more came from, we want to cut By the Sword, so we have to bring back 5-year plan, but that just brings me to, I don't know why they wanted to cut By the Sword. I don't think it was particularly problematic. Yeah, it was a card that saw a limited amount of play before 5-Year Plan came out because people were like, well, you kind of have in Soviets, and then 5-Year Plan was just sort of dominated the draw scene for a very long time until it got rotated, and then people went back to buy the sword and started to realize, actually, maybe this was better than we originally gave it credit for. And now it is going, and yeah, it's sad to see, but every deck is just, that runs by the sword is just going to take it out and put in 5-Year Plan.
Yeah. Core, any particular extras you want to add on By the Sword?
Not particularly. For me, this was just another like version of Enigma, but it just cared about the board rather than the hand. And as we all know, I am not fond of Enigma. I much prefer my cards to do the thing all the time, as opposed to being very like dependent on what I'm facing. So I never really played too much by the sword. I tended to lean more towards the more kind of guaranteed card draw, like Spring Offensive, for example. I prefer just knowing in deck building that my cards are going to do this every time I play them, for the most part. So yeah, by the sword for me, not a card I've played too much of. I've slotted it in every now and again in Soviet Control, especially like in the very aggressive sides of the metagame. But yeah, it's not a card I have too much experience with.
Yeah, we're sad to see you go. I hope you will come back one day. We're back to Covert, and I think in this nation we're probably going to talk about the Covert thing quite a bit more. So this is Covert Operation. Now, Covert Operation is a 5-cost standard Soviet order, and it just says add the top covert unit of your deck to your support line, full stop, duplicate it. This card, briefly, kind of single-handedly, I think at the time, gave Covert its biggest moment in the sun, when there was a moment where there was some viable Sov Japan and Japan Soviet covert decks that were taking advantage of the sheer value that this can offer. This card came out in Covert Operations, obviously, and now it's gone, and I get it, but, I don't know. Covert was a weird thing for me, because I was a bit sketch about it when it first came out, because the whole face-down hidden information thing, I was like, this could be interesting if it's handled well, or it could just be really oppressive, because there were some order-centric stuff that was just like, well, this is just sad face into it, and then there was, as possibly might have been pointed out by someone else in this video as well as me, there are a couple of unit types in this game that rather efficiently, high artillery and bombers, answer Covert in a way that just makes Covert players miserable. But I don't know, I think it's kind of sad to see Covert not having become something, but then I don't think it ever really did. But I don't know, JKing, you had a lot to say about this, as did I.
So I think where they went wrong with Covert is, I will say, I don't fundamentally hate Covert as a keyword. I fundamentally hate Covert how it was implemented in the game. I think Covert never should have been an archetype, and their attempt to make it an archetype was awful. I'm glad it was never good. If it ever was good, it would have been terrible, arguably one of the worst metas ever to play in. Because Covert is not a fun mechanic whenever your opponent has like 20 Covert cards and they're just spamming Coverts onto the board. Because one, it sort of like, it's similar thing with the countermeasures where it's like, okay, once the covert unit is on the board, it could be any one of the like 6 covert units that they play in their deck, and there's no way to know because they might have pulled it off randomly out of their deck from covert operations. And the way the covert units were designed were very, very polarizing. So there's like the 5 attack ambush guy. So it's like if you attack into it, you just immediately lose your guy and you're gonna just get snowballed off the board. But if you don't attack into it, maybe it's the one that summons the tank, or it's the one that consistently grows. I think the way Covert should have been designed is just a handful of powerful units that have the Covert keyword that a deck might want to run it on its own. And then if there's enough of those in the meta, maybe you consider running some of the cards that like preemptively reveal a Covert unit, like Lublin, or a card that destroys a Covert unit, like Tip of the Spear. I think Iron Man is a very, very well-designed Covert card. I think the Bazitsa is a very well-designed Covert card. I think basically all of the standard and limited covert cards are not inherently terribly designed on their own, but all of just the fact that they got cards that supported them as an archetype. Covert Operations as a card is the one that pushed the archetype into playability. But again, it's just a situation of covert as a keyword is terrible into anything that consistently proc you coverts the turn they come down because of how covert units are designed. And if they can't, and if they're a more order-reliant deck, they literally cannot do anything and they will just lose the game. It is just like the ultimate rock, paper, scissors type of design that I fundamentally hate. So I'm glad to see Covert Operations leaving because I never want to see a dedicated Covert deck ever again. I hope I'm fine with Covert the keyword coming back on units because Covert is a interesting keyword. It's similar to the can't be targeted by orders sort of not keyword but text that they have on a couple different units. But I hope it never comes back as a deck.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem is, as you say, and I know I've said this a lot, so I won't over-repeat myself if people have watched my videos before, but the problem with Covert was, if it ever was good, like really good, it was going to be oppressive and depressing and far too good for its own good. Core, I don't know whether you've seen a massive amount of Covert, because I think more or less by the time you were really into this, it was sort of waiting for its one moment in the sun, and that's kind of about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny to me that Covert Operation was, I believe, a forecast without the duplicate line of text up until United Fronts when they buffed it. So that's had a good 6-month span of being an actual card. And then they've killed it immediately upon like it entering the rotation window. I mean, obviously Radish in shambles right now. Don't know what he's gonna do for the next expansion tournament. He can't bring Covert anymore. Yeah, I'm glad Covert never took off. Similarly to JKing, I do have some issues with the mechanic itself. The fact that it's so uninteractive. Like it's just fundamentally designed to beat control decks for the most part, which is why we saw it like do so well in the tournaments, was because Radish just brought it against like control heavy lineups. You have things like Soviet Italy that really struggled to interact with them, and you can just let the separate battalions grow infinitely in the back line and then just push them up for lethal at some point in the game. So yeah, I'm glad it never took off because it is it is just by design relatively uninteractive. But I am there is some cool cover card. Like Grum and Goose is a pretty sick cover card. I think everyone loves Grum and Goose. It's one of the best card draw cards in US right now. So yeah, there's definitely cool things that can be done with Covert. I'm just hoping that they kind of learn and start making more Geeks and Iron Men moving forward, as opposed to trying to force an archetype onto it.
Shout out Berto Burrito, who built a fascinating thing on a similar thing. I'm very much of the yes, I'm with you on the interesting covert cards are the ones that don't really need covert support. They're just interesting of themselves. Shout out Berto, who built a very interesting deck that I believe he brought to a tournament that was using Butzista to buff like Katyusha and other artillery stuff in a kind of phenomenal big payoff way. And that and Iron Man and Grum and Goose, that's interesting because that you can see it coming and you can do something about it, but if you don't, it does a cool thing. As opposed to you can see it coming, but it's one of 4 things on the board, and if you hit the wrong one, then it's gonna go off. And yeah, I don't know. I think collectively we're all kind of not so much dubious about Covert. We're dubious about Covert as Covert the archetype, Covert the deck. Swarms of Covert give me a problem. It's, you know, to paraphrase Men in Black, like a covert card is interesting. A covert deck of functional cards that are good is a massive, oppressive, unpleasant thing that nobody wants to see in the game. So yeah, I kind of agree. JKing, I know you're about to speak too. Anything else to kind of throw in on this?
Yeah, I'll say I think Grum and Goose is the perfect example of a interesting use of the covert mechanic, because you can play down Goose, and your opponent could theoretically answer it the turn it's played, and then it's done functionally nothing. It was a 3-credit unit that your opponent answered. But you can play down Goose and then reveal it immediately the next turn and draw a couple cards. Or you can, if you think your opponent can't answer Goose, you can greed out and keep Goose on the board until a specific turn when you reveal it and you draw a bunch of cards, and that's kind of it. It doesn't grow from staying in covert. Your opponent is not immediately punished because they can't answer it immediately. Like, if they can't reveal Goose, they can put up guards to stop you from being able to hit the HQ when you reveal Goose. They can put you under pressure to make you have to trade Goose or trade out with your other unit so that you can't hit HQ for the card draw. There's actual counterplay, whereas, most of the Soviet covert units are basically just, like, either you get hard punished for attacking into this, or you get hard punished for not being able to attack into this.
Yeah, I mean, maybe my favorite example of that is Separate Battalion, which is just this ludicrous thing that keeps growing, and you're going to get hard punished if you don't answer it, which is not a fun way to do it. I will say, shout out, one thing I am sad about if we ever do see the Goose leaving, and hey, I'm not saying whether we are or not, US later, guys, but one thing that I do like about the Goose is its interaction with my new favourite Soviet plane. There is something really satisfying about a turn in which you can have Goose on the board, deploy and attack with Cobra, and your opponent is there going, oh crap, they've got double guaranteed draw, but I really want to answer the Cobra, not the crappy Goose. But if I don't answer the crappy Goose, they're going to get draw. That was one of the things that procked me into building the deck that so many people seem to have enjoyed. It's like the one deck that I have ever built myself that anyone ever seemed to have enjoyed. And by the way, thank you for all of the positive support that people had for that. But that was part of what made it fun, is that it's an interesting piece of interaction without just being, do something about it or you lose the game. So, next up, what do we have next? Yes, speaking of covert stuff, and okay, this is Field Recon. I'm going to go gently, because I was very loud about this card when it was announced. I had issues. But Field Recon is a 2-cost standard Soviet card, and it says, give target infantry or tank +2/+2 for each unit with covert control. I personally am not sad to see this go for many of the reasons that we've already talked about. The potential for covert as a package to be ridiculous. There were some stupid things you could do with this if you could find a way to make them actually work. I'm grateful that nobody ever did. It was tried a chunk. I can't remember, JKing. Is this one of the cards we agreed on or disagreed on when we were discussing Covert? Because there was a lot during Covert Operations reveals.
I think Field Recon is bottom 5 cards of this expansion. I think Field Recon is the stupidest card they've ever printed. That's not true, but it might be top 10 stupidest cards they've ever printed in terms of just like, why would you ever put this in a deck? This card has so much anti-synergy and just shows how much they phoned it in on the card design when it came to Covert. Like, they cooked when they came up with Covert as a mechanic, and then when they were like, okay, we have some Covert cards, what do we do with this Covert mechanic? And then they just phoned it in and were just like, I don't know, a card that buffs something for every Covert unit you have on the board. But that's unit in Covert, so it has to be not revealed. But that means you also can't play it on a Covert unit. But also you can't play this on a Covert unit before attacking, because you can't buff Covert units until they're revealed, and they can only reveal by attacking. And once they've attacked, then buffing them doesn't matter. So you need you have to have a bunch of Covert units in Covert on the board, plus one unit that's not in Covert. And then you play Field Recon, and then it's like, well, you're living in Disneyland. Either you've hard lost before ever reaching this position, or you were going to win the game anyways by just having Covert units in your deck.
And confirm that this is actively true, because I did build a Field Recon payoff deck because I wanted to see if it was actually possible to make it work, because I was interested in how the design was meant to work. it took me a lot of effort, but I did eventually get to the point whereby I was able to have a blitz tank in hand, a board of covert units my opponent didn't really want to hit in case they did a lot of damage to them because they might have ambush, and then I was able to put the tank down and throw throw field recon on it and run it forward and smack it in the face. But I made a small mistake in that I actually clicked on my covert cards before I decided to use the tank and went, 2 turns ago, I could have just revealed all my covert cards and won the game anyway. And that was ultimately the problem with this card. It's back in the nothing burger factory of, sure, it's theoretically a massive buff, but by the time it's relevant, you're just bluntly, sorry kids if you're one of the people who made it work, but you are bluntly mostly just dick swinging if you hang around long enough for this to be your win condition, because you've kind of won the game already, because you must have had covert units on the board for a while to get there. Anyway, Core, lead us away from the madness of JKing and I's ranting.
I mean, in my eyes, this is just unplayable garbage.
I like that. Let's let Core summarize it there and just leave it be, because I think, to be fair...
So, I don't have any more thoughts on Field Recon as a card, but this is the last Soviet card that has the word covert that we're going to be looking at for the cards in here, which is something that I want to talk about, because if you go to the collection, you look up covert, all of them are currently in standard, because this is the first expansion that covert cards are able to be rotated, the first rotation that they're able to be rotated. So they're all there. And if you look it up and then compare it to the list of cards that are leaving, every single card that supports running coverts in your deck is gone, with the exception of the Recon Company. And every single card that has, like, sort of counters coverts or has anti-covert components to it is gone, except for Lublin, but nobody's ever played that as an anti-covert card. But the actual covert units, only 2 are leaving the game. It's only Kawanishi and the Cavalry Recon from US. I just don't understand why they didn't just... Like, I'm not saying they had to rotate every single card that said covert on it once. Like, I'm not saying they absolutely needed to do that, but there's... Every single time that we see a card rotated from Japan, USA, or Soviet, that we were like, oh, why is this leaving? Like, not cards from, like, tier 1 decks, because obviously the rotation could be a form of balance change. But anytime you see an interesting card leaving from one of those 3 nations, ask yourself, why didn't they just rotate one of the covert cards that are going to see 0 play? Because there was 0 reason. Outside of, like, a couple. Obviously, like, Goose can be played, Iron Man can be played. But, like, you know, who is going to be playing, like, independent in a deck? No. Who's going to be playing separate BTN if you don't have any ways of pulling out multiple copies of it? And I don't know. This just makes me very, very angry. I feel like they really just... I have no thoughts on why they chose to do this.
If it makes you feel better, you're not alone. I do look at I look at my baby card draw in the form of Buy the Sword, and I'm like, in this special pitching slot, why isn't it the weird-ass covert payoff Recon guy for the deck that clearly nobody wants to see played anymore anyway? Just leave the variety, like you say, the agency in deck building, and pitch a card that no one's going to bother to... Unless, of course, magically, have to say it, somehow... the Homefront comes with some more covert support. God, please don't let that be the case. But Lord forbid that there was some big push to make covert stronger, and that's the thing. Hypothetically possible. Really hope it's not. Clearly not my favourite thing. But yeah, I do agree with you. Every time I see a card that I'm like, But like, there's got to be a standard that you could have kept and rotated Separate Battalion for a start. Because Separate Battalion in and of itself is still just a really irritating card to deal with because it keeps growing. But anyway, we're not going to keep going at this. Otherwise, we're going to keep you guys on one video about Soviets for longer than we've done on any other nation. And Britain was already long enough. And Germany was just a journey. Gambit. So this is a rotating Soviet elite. Honest gov. This is Gambit. Gambit is a 5-cost Soviet order that says both players. Sorry, I really struggle with this card. Forgive me. It says both players add the unit with the highest cost in their hand to their support line. I have never understood the point of this card, except if I'm hanging out with someone and I want to film a meme video for YouTube. Just, honestly, my summary, TLDR, I'll let the other guys talk, rotate it, rework it, bring it back as something I would ever run in a deck. Core, before we let the legend go, what do you have opinions on Gambit?
I do. Again, I'm going to be making a call back to Hearthstone that JKing is also probably going to get, which is Ancestor's Call. It 4-cost Shaman card, literally the exact same text as this. Both players put a random minion from their hand onto the battlefield. Ancestor's Call in Hearthstone didn't see play until in the last couple of years. It's become like a wild staple because we have just like a critical mass of big things you want to cheat into play. But when you look at like Soviet's pool, the only target for this is the Stalin. That's the only thing you would ever want to Gambit in. Everything else is an order, or it's something that already reduces its own cost, like Force Guards, for example. So Gambit was like it's an interesting card. It's an interesting card that just didn't ever get the targets. And like, I mean, now they're returning 25th Infantry, which could theoretically be a target for Gambit, but they're rotating Gambit. So I don't know. It was, again, one of those interesting cards that never really got the targets. Mayhem is a much better version of this effect for the most part.
So I'm actually going to disagree strongly with both of you on a few different things. First of all, Ancestors Call never saw play until recently. Clearly, you were not around for Malygos Shaman.
Oh,
Back in,
real,
like,
real and
EVG.
true. Yes, I forgot about that. I repressed that.
But sticking to cards, you are absolutely right that Gambit never saw play. But both of you are missing the big picture. And I was going to initially start off by correcting the misinformation that also frequents around the Cards Discord, that I was very, very hyped on Gambit. That is more true than I was hyped on Monastyr. But I also, if you go back and watch the VODs, I did say Gambit's probably not going to see any play outside of me. And I did bring Gambit to a tournament. So it's seen tournament play, which is more than most cards that have been printed. But the thing with Gambit is you can look at it as a just substantially worse, like, Machines of War or Mayhem, just a substantially worse way to cheat out a big unit from your hand. But I think that is the incorrect way to think about this guy. Obviously, that's something you can do, and that's something people have tried to do. But generally speaking, that is not a great use of this card. The use of this card is to bring out the biggest unit from your opponent's hand while you have the ability to deal with it, and it gets around stuff like Comet returning to hand, it gets around stuff like deployment effects, and that's the big use of this card. It's to bring out your opponent's Leopold and then you hammer it, or it's to bring out your opponent's Comet and then you trade into it. It's meant to be able to deal with your opponent's threat. And by I'm saying, I'm not saying necessarily the 1939 had that in mind with this card. Clearly the name Gambit is their intention was to, just play it and bring out your big card, and it's just a Timmy card. But the actual use case in, like, a competitive environment is to deal with your opponent's biggest threat before they have a chance to pop off with it. There's also, like, certain things where it might, like, pull out, like, the Shiden from a Shiden OTK, or the Kawanishi in, like, a Last Rites deck. The issue Gambit has always faced is
Expensive.
it's really expensive. It's absolutely unplayable against aggro, generally speaking. And in the times where Soviet control were best and that overlapped with Mayhem, your biggest unit in Soviet control was ISU, which is a deployment effect. It's one of the very few deployment effects in Soviets, which you didn't want to pull out your ISU without triggering the deployment effect. And then after that, there was, sometimes the 272nd. And if you miss 272nd, then the next most expensive card is probably Naval Brigade, which is the only other deployment effect in Soviet control at the time, which you didn't want to pull out. So you were actively punishing yourself more often than not to play Gambit, as well as punishing the opponent, and there just wasn't enough decks to sort of deal with it. And even the German controls that existed ran King Tiger, so you're not pulling out Commodore Leopold, you're pulling out their King Tiger, which is substantially harder to deal with, because this is also before Winter War was a card, or Depths of Winter was a card. So I think Gambit is much better than everyone gave it credit for. And I think if it comes back, it doesn't need to be entirely reworked. I think it just probably needs to go down to 4 cost. And yeah, I think at 4 cost, and with the current metagame, and I think Gambit has a decent chance of playing, being seen some play. But I know for a fact Gambit is one of my favorite cards in the game, and I'm going to miss it.
Okay,
Yeah, it crossed my mind. It crossed my mind, like, when I was reading Gambit the first time through, that, oh, this is, like, it can be used as a Dirty Rat. Again, Hearthstone thing.
Yeah.
Dirty Rat was just, you pull a thing from your opponent's hand. But God, it's just so prohibitively expensive, especially when you have to play it alongside removal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a couple of call-outs. First, this is the reason there are 3 of us. That's legitimately the competitive tournament player of us in Galaxy Brain mode. Legitimately. It's a fair play. It's a good call. When I'm going to call JKing out on one thing, though. When JKing says this has seen tournament play, bear in mind the source is the guy who, for shiggles, brought a ridiculous Infi Commandos deck to a tournament he didn't care about and won it, which I don't have words for the way that illustrates why I always want you around when I'm talking about cards. It is a fair point, but I am just saying, consider the source when it comes to bringing something. This, by the way, would have considerably more use in tournament play than the madness that was. Go check out the video if you haven't. It's well worth watching. Yeah.
I just checked. I brought Gambit to 2 different tournaments. And ironically, in that same tournament I brought the Commando OTK, I also brought Singleton Soviets, which there's no benefit to running Singleton Soviets. I just brought it for the memes. Honestly, that was probably a worse deck than the Commando's OTK deck. And oddly enough, I didn't bring Gambit in the Singleton Soviets deck. The Gambit was just run in traditional control.
See, now I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed. Anyway, moving on before we start into a video that actually would be fun to do at some point. The greatest hits in various directions of JKing at tournaments. Okay, so Gambit, bit of entertainment. Mass Attack. So Mass Attack is a 4-cost order. This is a base set card. I mean, I've just realised it's on screen. I was about to say this is a base set card, I think. Shows how much I bother to read the other half of the screen while we're doing this. It is a base set card. Look, I could have looked smart. Apparently I'm not. I'm not even smart enough to... Anyway, moving on. Mass Attack is a base set card. It's a 4-cost special Soviet order, and it has a fairly simple piece of text. It just says deal damage to target equal to the number of units you control. Clearly, obviously, the immediate thing that people will think about, and I have watched them do it, then try and build around it, and then either it kind of sort of works or it doesn't, is if I can somehow get a big enough board, I can hit HQ for 9? Which, yes, theoretically. There are decks that can do it. High tokens. Some people did run it as a tokens finisher. Wasn't massively a fan myself, but, you know, it's a thing. I don't think I've ever known it be super played, but I don't think I've ever known a time when someone wasn't at least trying to do something with it, because it's one of those cards that has that trip card player mental archetype thing of feels like you can get some kind of awesome payoff from it. But yeah, I don't know. JKing, what are your thoughts on Mass Attack leaving us finally?
I don't have a lot of thoughts on Mass Attack leaving. I have a lot of thoughts on Mass Attack potentially returning, because if they wanted to get really funky with it, they could give it the like reverse Shodano treatment and have it count all units on board.
That was exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
As Mass Attack, you only really need it to be 5. Mass Attack is good. Like at 5, Mass Attack is a card that you would consider playing in a wide variety of decks. 6, it's getting very, very good. 7 or higher, Mass Attack is crazy. Because what a lot of people forget is Mass Attack doesn't have to go into the HQ. I think a lot of people look at this and they're like, oh, I get 9 units on board and then I do 2 Mass Attacks and hit my opponent in the HQ for 18. But like, you can just Mass Attack like an armored train to allow all of your like light infantries or columns or whatever to hit into the HQ. So Mass Attack doesn't actually have to get that high. So like even putting Mass Attack at 3, there's a few decks that might consider running it at 3, and if they keep it at 4 but count all units on board, I think that's actually like probably a very, very good card. So I don't think they have to tweak Mass Attack too much for it to see a ton of play. And it actually won the 2020 World Championship. CCMS brought tokens, which was not on anyone's radar, and he ran 2 Mass Attacks in it, and he, I believe, maybe not the final game, but he certainly used Mass Attack to win several of his games on his way to winning the World Championship in 2020. And yeah, I was doing sort of exactly the opposite of what I was just saying, where you could use it to hit units. The control meta at the time was not a lot of healing, but a lot of high health guards. So tokens would just reach a point where they couldn't get through all the guards, and at that point, you would just Mass Attack them in the HQ. And yeah, so Mass Attack has seen World Championship play, and that's basically it.
Yeah, it's legit. I mean, I will say it's definitely interesting. Core, I don't know how much you really likely to have played with Mass Attack, because it hasn't really had many decks that massively support it recently.
No, I haven't played around with it like at all. Again, JKing touched on like the exact 2 things I was gonna say about it. Drop it to 3 and make it count all units in play. Because I was gonna make the comparison that hey, they did it to Salve, why not Mass Attack?
Yep.
I mean, like, yeah, at 3, I would consider playing this. At 3, if it counted everything, I would absolutely
yeah.
This.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, there are definitely ways, and yes, JKing does to make the smart comment, which I was sort of expecting he was going to, which is it doesn't always have to hit HQ. It can just be decent on value removal. I think it's just become less on value in comparison to some other tools. Certainly in a world where we've got extended barrage, this has to work that bit harder for you to really think about playing it. But yeah, I think we'll probably see it back. I don't think we're going to spend much more time on this, because then we go to tractor factories. Okay, so this is another Soviet elite. This is a 8-cost elite, and again, it is a relatively simple piece of text. It's 8 cost. Add 2 T-34 1942s to your support line. T-34 1942, which is on your screen, granted quite small, is the 5/5 2-op cost blitz tank that technically costs 5, but obviously doesn't for this. Obviously, T-34 synergy has been attempted in Blood and Iron, and it was kind of sort of okay, except everyone realised there were better things you could be doing. I have built multiple T-34 decks that I just had fun with because I liked the tribal feel of them, even though they weren't super optimal. I have played this in them. I have played this considerably more often in heavier control decks, where I just quite like being able to summon myself a couple of... deploy, whatever. I'm a dinosaur, sue me. A couple of 5/5s to win out a game. But yeah, Tractor Factories is not a terrible card at all. I am a little bit curious though. I'm going to start with Core, but I want to save JKing at the end for some thoughts on whether you have any views on precisely why we feel the need to rotate it. But I'm also interested to find out whether Core has particularly played around, particularly with tractor factories.
No, I understand the tractor factories used to be like a big part of the Soviet control as like as one of their end game options, basically one of their closing tools. But I think that time is like pretty far past. We now have things like fourth guards and front formation. I think front formation, when you look at front formation, you look at tractor factories, it's like it's night and day the amount of value that front formation generates. It is a little bit of a shame considering we recently got like a slight buff to like turning point. So on turn 10, you could in theory have gone like Tractor Factory's turning point, and that was like a big board swing. But it's not like consistent enough to actively put in a control deck, and the T34 deck itself is nowhere near consistent enough for that to be even worth considering. So yeah, again, I think it's just one of those control tools that's just a little bit outclassed by some of the newer stuff, particularly front formation.
Yeah, I mean, front formation does kind of power creep it to hell. JKing!
Honestly, despite being the Soviet control player, and being a Soviet control player since forever, basically, before Tractor Factories came out in Theaters of War. I remember when Tractor Factories got released at 9 cost. Tractor Factories has just never been a card I've been too impressed with. Like, I've played it a bunch, because there was a period of time where you had to play it, because Soviets had nothing better. But honestly, Soviets got better cards by, like, breakthrough. Certainly by Legions, they had better cards. I think people who were still playing this by Brothers in Arms were completely trolling. I think there was even some last gasps among some players playing this in Winter War. I have no idea what anybody was doing playing this card past, like, 2021. This card is just not that good. If you have infinite credits, this card's pretty good. Unfortunately, infinite credits are not a thing, so on 12 credits, which is the most you could reach naturally without ramp, you can hit 2 things in the front line for 5.
Yeah.
Or you can hit 1 thing in the support line for 5. And you got a tank. You know what's a card that sees 0 play is M4A2, which for 5 credits you get 2 4/4s. So for 3 credits less, you get -2/-2 in stats. And obviously they don't have Blitz, but it doesn't really matter because honestly, the biggest use case for Tractor Factories is you just play it out on 8 credits. But yeah, using Tractor Factories to trade anything is too slow. Using Tractor Factories on 8 to just get bodies is too slow. I have no thoughts on this card. The only thing I have to say about this card is now I will stop complaining about losing Soviet mirrors where my opponent decides to play Tractor Factories instead of Bloody Sickle.
That's fair.
Yeah.
It's not a big loss. It's not shaking anything up in the meta. I do sort of hope it gets reworked and brought back in a way that is functional, because I do like the idea of it, but I do agree that it is so credit inefficient. And the 12 cost thing is one of the first things I ever said when someone showed me this card is, but wait, operation cost. You're telling me I can have them, but I can't actually use them both in the most effective way.
It's the Panzer's Look Dellum all over again.
Yeah. But yeah.
I think Core mentioned the turning point. Yeah, it was a T34 card for the last few years, and T34s have seen basically no play, so it's fine for this to leave. The biggest thing I'm going to miss is just saying Tractor Factories. It's very fun calling it Track Fac or Tractor Factories. It's a very satisfied phrase to say.
Hey, fair. I can give you that one. It's got a nice little feel to it. Next up, we have Turmoil. Turmoil is a covert operations card. We are seeing a lot of these. Turmoil is a 2-cost limited order that says deal 2 damage to a unit, deal 4 damage instead if it is damaged. I don't. Someone help me out. Beyond, okay, it's gone. I'm out. Anyone got anything notable to say about Turmoil?
This is the type of card that I would say we were, like, happy to play it back in 2019, 2020, except this card came out in 2024. So, yeah, that's... I mean, the only thing I will say is it was fun. It wasn't awful. You could use it. I don't think it was ever like the correct choice. I just don't understand why we're losing this instead of like separate BTN or
Yeah.
38th Guard rifles or any of the other covert guys.
Yeah. Okay. Works for me. We done. Winter Offensive. It's another Soviet elite. It's another Soviet elite that has seen quite a chunk of play in its time. Winter Offensive is the 8 cost Soviet order that says deal 4 damage to all. Yeah, pretty simple, really. Play card, everything takes 4 damage. It is the ultimate windmill slam. Look at me, make thing go boom card. I'm not offended to see it go. I'm not sure it was doing anything overly drastically problematic. There are other things in it. I'm still sort of on. This is one of those like, maybe you could have rotated something else, but is it really the end of the world that this is going in the current meta? I don't know. It'd be nice to still have this around as a Soviet option, but I do think if you wanted to keep it around, it might need a buff. But anyway, anyone else got anything to add? Because I'm sort of just space filling right now.
I'll let Core go first. I have a few things to say about this card.
I'm sad to see this go. I know it's fallen out of play, like quite recently. Like from Blood and Iron on, I think people were like had pretty much stopped playing Winter Offensive for the most part. It would show up from time to time. It's a card I still to this day run in Soviet Control because the extra. It's just nice to have the extra board clear, particularly after losing Depths of Winter. Just having the extra AoE on top of strategic focus is nice. Plus, it also deals burn damage, which is relevant in some matchups.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Information and the big T34, the shock T34 guy. So, like, yeah, it's sad that we're losing another big AoE. Soviets now literally only have Strat Focus as their AoE tool.
Yeah, I will say that
unfortunate.
Yeah, the number of games that I have won on 5 HQ defense because my opponent was on 4 because this was in my hand is greater than 0. But yeah, let's let JKing go because he's certainly seen this card for a while.
So I think all of those guys who I saw running Tractor Factories in their deck to just make it heavier, well into like 2023, 2024. If they just took out those Tractor Factories and replaced it with Winter Offensive, because some of them ran both, but a lot of them ran Tractor Factories instead of Winter Offensive, I'm confident they would have boosted their win rate by 10% with that one card. I think Winter Offensive might be the most underrated Soviet elite that has ever been printed. When they announced it, everybody was like, this card's absolutely terrible. It's like playing 4 Winter Warfares, but you're spending 8 for it instead of 4, and it's like, well, that's a terrible example because it costs 1 card instead of 4 cards, and also you can't run 4 Winter Offensives. Yeah, everyone was just compared this to Winter Offensive and compared it to Carpet Bomb when it got announced, and they were like, this card sucks. And I was immediately like, well, this is Soviets we're talking about. Soviets is famously the nation with no board clears, and that's aged poorly, but at the time, Soviets very famous for having absolutely no board clears, and I thought Winter Offensive is going to be crazy, and it was crazy. And then they released Depths of Winter, and then they released Strategic Focus, and they got better board clears, but that doesn't mean you have to stop running Winter Offensive, and now Depths of Winter is gone. So just keep running Winter Offensive. I've been running it in almost all of my decks. I know I harped on about how I think 5-year plan is going to be terrible into burn, but that's because, generally speaking, you need to draw cards to win the game against most decks. And if to draw cards you have to damage yourself, that sucks. And is going to be an issue against a burn deck. You don't have to clear the board against every deck, because not every deck is going to be making boards that need to be cleared, and one of those decks is typically burn, which you can deal with just single target removal and guards. So you just don't have to play Winter Offensive against burn. So Winter Offensive was still fine even in the burn meta because you just don't play it against the decks that you're worried about your health total against. It can act as reach against the decks that you're trying to close out the game against. It can act as just an extra board clear because it's like, would you rather have this or Strategic Focus in your hand? You'd rather have Strategic Focus 9 times out of 10. But sometimes Strategic Focus is in the bottom half of your deck, and you have Winter Offensive instead. And instead of just losing the game because you don't have a board clear, you play Winter Offensive. Absolutely love this card. I'm very sad to see it go because it's not broken, and I think Soviets having 2 board clears is fine. And they could have rotated Bazutsa. if they wanted to get rid of Covert.
Yep, I mean, that's also true. I will say, small piece of random trivia, and I shan't name names, but an interesting conversation that took place was an unnamed, relatively competitive player who asked me why I still had this in a covert deck. Sorry, not in a control deck. Because I did, pretty much any time I was running a Soviet control deck, have a copy of this, because why the hell wouldn't you, as JKing has so recently pointed out. Just why would you not? But yeah, the question I was asked was, why have you got a copy of this in? And I'm like, would I pay 8 credits to clear a board if I don't have another option? Yes. Would I pay 8 credits to just win the game? Yes. Ergo, why wouldn't I at least include it? Because it's 1 card. But yeah, I am wondering if we might see, I hope, a new Soviet elite clear of some kind come in, because I kind of think if they still want to be the control nation, it'd be nice for them to have another good board clear.
I mean, I'm a huge Victory Banners believer. I think Victory Banners is amazing. Might be the second most underrated Soviet. That's another conversation.
Yeah, from what little I have played of it, if you guys want to take like a thing and just run with it and comment on us to let us know later, I will say I'm with JKing on this. I've played around with Victory Banners a bit. I think it's way better than people think it is. But anyway, that's not this conversation. But if you want to take that and run with it, feel free. Let us know how you get on.
The number of times I've received comments on like a stream or a video where I lose a game where I'm at like 4 health and I need to clear the board and I have Winter Offensive in my hand, and if I play it I die, so I surrender the game because I don't have any way to deal with it. And I get comments where it's just like, well, like that's why Winter Offensive's bad. And it's like, well, what other card that would I replace Winter Offensive with in that situation that would let me win that game?
Yeah, I was going to say, I will agree with you the moment you tell me the other card that I could have in my hand right now that wins me the game. Yeah, okay. Anyway, before we get too ranty, because it's at least 2 of us are avowed control players, let's move on to the 125th Rifle Regiment. This is another Soviet special that is leaving us. This is the 4 cost, 1 op cost, 3/4 guard. And it says, when the enemy draws a card, deal 1 damage to the enemy HQ. Sure, I guess. Wasn't really doing anything massively offensive. I've seen people try and make it do things with forced draw, and it's occasionally been used to be a bit punishing. And every now and then, if you're running a draw-heavy deck, you don't love to see it. But, I mean, I don't think it's card I've seen a ton of play. Anyway, in the interests of time, I'm kind of done. It's okay. It's going. Are there other things I'd rather see go? Yeah, for example, the Recon guys, but we won't go over that endlessly. Anyone else?
There was a time where a lot of other people were playing like 2 of this in a lot of Soviet control decks back in like 2023, 2022, and I never really got it. There was just better cards to be running. It's just its stats are so bad, and like its best case scenario is so middling. That I never really understood it. If this was like a 3/6, I would put this in Soviet control, absolutely. If this was a 3/5, I would look at it. 3/4 is just too small. Like, I'd rather run the 3k 3/4 guard that doesn't deal damage to my opponent and just save that credit. Yeah, this card just suffers from low stats.
Yeah, I think at one point I did actually say I would have quite liked to have seen this be like a 2/7 or a 1/8 like the other 1/8 guard, where it's just a fat body with no attack in its effect. But yeah, Core, you were about to give us your thoughts on this one.
This is one of like a handful of hate bears that we're like about to see rotate out of Soviet. I think they're just doing it to free up design space more than anything else. It is interesting to see this rotated though, because it had recently, like in the last like 2 weeks, like seen a sudden spike in play with that really weird like Soviet Japan punish deck that's running around. Where they play Rifle Regiment, they play Take Liberty, and then they also like use honorifics to convert a bunch of their stuff into Rifle Regiment and KV1s, just to like punish you by cycling through their deck with Take Libs. So it's interesting that it's being rotated like immediately after that deck kind of spiking in popularity. I don't think there's I think this is probably locked in for a while, but it's just very funny that as soon as it started seeing play, it's getting shot.
Yeah, that's fair. Right. Who next? Yes. It's the 1357th Rifles. I never tire of saying that because there's just something amusing about it. This is a Soviet standard. It's 5 cost, it's 3/7, and it says when this unit takes damage or is fully repaired, it gets +2 attack. It's a card, it's a standard. It's probably not going to massively impact decks that are seeing play. They're done. Pass.
I have 2 things to say about this card. One is its number is the largest number in the game, and the other thing is that this card came out in Brothers in Arms. I'm done.
Cool.
That first one was a deep cut.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is just repair synergy. That they said like 2 expansions ago that they were getting rid of all the repair stuff, so this is just tidying, I think, the last of it.
Okay, and we're done. Sorry. Right. 13th Rifles. So 13th Rifle Regiment. This is a limited card. 2 cost, 1 op, cost 2/2. Destruction. Add a random Soviet infantry to your hand. I have like nothing to say. It's a card. It's kind of gone. I have occasionally seen it be like, it's not the worst value card to play when your collection's tiny, but it's a 2 cost, 1 op, cost 2/2 infantry.
Yeah, I think there's like a world that could feasibly exist where this is like a fine card to play in a Soviet value deck if they just don't have other like 2 cost cards. I think that there's probably a fair argument that this card is not nearly as bad as its complete and utter lack of play would suggest. But it's just not a card that's like particularly interesting to try out because it's just one of those cards where it's like the value of the card you get off of it might on average be enough to be worth considering, but you'd have to play so many games to make that decision.
Yeah.
And you're just gonna like get the one game where you're against like Germany value and you get like a 1-drop, or you're against aggro and you get like the 25th Infantry Regiment that you're not gonna survive to turn 8 to play, and
Yeah.
you're gonna be like, this card sucks.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to random is truly random, doesn't it? You can get some real stinkers on this at the worst possible time. Core, anything to add?
I mean, on paper, it's like a fine zoo card, but like that kind of deck doesn't really exist for Soviet, and if it did, there's better 2-drops to play in that deck anyway. So yeah.
Yeah. Right. 13th is done. We've got more rifles. This is the 266th Guard Rifles. This is the 6 cost, 2 op, cost 5/6. It's a limited card, and it says becomes veteran if the enemy has no veteran units at the start of your turn. Yes, it's a sentence. And then it turns into a 6 cost, 1 op, cost 5/6 veteran that says when you deploy a unit, it becomes veteran if possible. It's a veteran synergy card. I've seen people try and cook with this. I lack the words. Words, they are gone.
I think the only thing worth pointing out about this card is that it's from Brothers in Arms.
Yep. Right. I mean, we could just be using that as a line, but yeah, we'll just leave it there. Moving on to a card we might have slightly more to say about. This is the 34th Guards. This is a card people have come to know and hate. This card is the 7 cost, 1 op cost standard card. It is a 6/6 infantry, and it says if in your hand, costs 2 less each time your HQ takes friendly damage. This was, I mean, this was just a thing in self-damage. There are a million different ways that this card has been used over the years. All of them have basically boiled down to, ha, look at my stats, but it's worked because it can be a beast to deal with because it is a lot of body for occasionally nothing.
Core, I'll pass this to you.
Yeah, I have probably the least amount of experience playing against this card, but I probably hate this card more than any other card in the game because when I started playing during Blood and Iron, the two main decks in the metagame were the two different flavors of ramp, like Brit main US ally or US main Brit ally, and then you had Soviet self damage. And I got very tired very quickly of dying on turn 5 to a KV2 being generated off this.
Yep.
God, that absolutely sucked to play against. And then you couldn't remove it because the KV2 had like protection from the orders from the armor, so you couldn't like carpet bombing it to clear it. Oh, just incredibly frustrating to play against was the KV2s being cheated off this. I don't know, like since Stand Together got rotated, it hasn't done anything because I mean you could technically Ural factories it now, but why would you bother? Because you're just getting the 7/7 tank off it, but like most of the other self damage stuff is gone with what was it, Red Dawn, and there was a few other pieces that got rotated out. So I don't know, the support it's not really there for it anymore. But God, this card infuriated me for a good month and a half.
So that's very interesting to hear, because I was gonna say that this card might be the card that 1939 seems to hate the most, that the community doesn't mind. But apparently, maybe I'm just out of touch with what the average person thinks about 34th Guards. I do think that 34th Guards gets consistently punished for other cards existing. Because 34th Guards, self-damage was a very good deck that was very difficult to pilot correctly, and I don't think had like amazing win rates or anything. And then, but it did lead to certain toxic play patterns because of Ura. And then they nerfed 34th Guards and then rotated Ura. And then they nerfed self-damage again, despite nobody really playing it. And then it started to come back onto the map because of Stand Together, because they did the change to KV, which was largely unnecessary. And then they nerfed 34th Guards again, and now it's being rotated. I don't know why 1939 seems to hate self-damage so much. Like, it's probably received the most nerfs as an archetype, relative to how little play it has seen competitively or popularly.
Yeah.
It's genuinely shocking, and the fact that this is getting rotated instead of separate BTN as a standard, it genuinely infuriates me. Especially because 456, the self-damage 2-drop is still in the game. Like they're pushing, like Rush isn't exactly self-damage, but like there's a, if you're playing with the shock guy that gets attack and shock every time you take damage, you want to play that with Winter Warfares, and if you're playing Winter Warfares, yeah, you might be wanting to play Sickles, and you want to do that with Recons, and then you want 34th Guards, and that came out like in the most recent major expansion, or maybe that was 2 expansions ago now. But yeah, I don't know. It just seems bizarre to not rotate the self-damage package and instead just rotate this one card after nerfing it twice.
Yeah, I do have to say, I kind of do agree. Like, this card, more than anything else, reminds me of the guy at the end of the Doctor Strange movie who's left with the curse of constantly punching himself in the face. It does occasionally seem to just get punished for existing, even though the card itself, like you say, is kind of inoffensive. I mean, yes, it can be a big body if you reach to it, but it's a payoff for having damaged yourself. It just seems like every now and then the devs feel like self-damage is getting dangerously a bit uppity again. Quick, we need to do something. The default... You know how we say the default plan is slap Blitz on it to buff it? The default plan for self-damage might occasionally become playable seems to be quick, nerf 34th Guards. And yet, this is probably, in a value-centric deck, one of the few times that this card might actually see some useful play. I'm totally with JKing, by the way, without over-hammering home the point. I do think it is a crime, an actual crime in rotation, that this is leaving and Separate Battalion isn't. Because this could actually be played in an interesting value Soviet deck. Not a good one, before you start atting me because I'm saying... But you could play this in a self-damaging sickle using, like JKing says, Soviet deck and run the HQ damaging tank. And this could be a good value tool to have in just a solid value deck. And that might actually be interesting, whereas separate battalions only use cases anyway. I'm not. We're done. We've made our point. Let's move on before I get excessively ranty. But safe to say, I am a little bit sad to see this guy go. I also think he's going with that look on his face like, he's the kid. He's the kid at school who's there in the middle of the riot, and he's the only one left when the principal comes out at lunchtime. And he's like, wait, I was just eating my lunch. Why am I the one who ends up getting punished? But that's just 34th Guards. Oh, I forgot this card was in the rotation. Oh, I need to take a breath. This card and I, oh dear. This is the 35th Mountain Rifles. This is a 4-cost limited Soviet infantry. It is a 5/5 body. It's Alpine for reasons. And it says, if this unit is removed from your deck, it enters the battlefield instead. This is a card that I saw the text on and suddenly thought, are we about to see something like, are we going to do something interesting? Is there going to be a weird, like, non-discard, remove from your deck thing that's coming out? Are we going to try, is there going to be some punish payoff thing? And I was like, there's so much cool design space with a piece of text like this. And then Tumbleweed. It had no active support. It had no synergistic other cards. And it had Alpine on it. And I was really sad for this card because it had the promise of maybe it could be something interesting. And then it's, to my knowledge, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, it has just sat gathering dust in people's collection ever since, going, just, could I have just one friend? Maybe then we'd make it into a deck. Honestly, I think, and I might be wrong, I think the veteran twin cards from Germany have seen more proactive play than this card. Anyway, someone else take over, because this card just makes me sad.
I mean, there is a card that's synergized with this, and it's called Jet Prototype. This is a key card in the Germany Soviet Jet Prototype deck. You play Jet Prototype on 6, and you mill 3 35th Mountain Rifles, and then you have a Jet Prototype and 3 7/7s, and it's insane.
I did not expect to be stepping back in, but as someone who lived through and routinely lived in the top 100 during Jet Prototype meta, I can tell you for certain that was not a thing anybody cared about, because the deck just was doing things a very different way. Hypothetically, you're not wrong. But no. Anyway, JKing, take it away.
So, this card, contrary to what you might believe, is not actually an expansion card. It did come out in expansion, but this is not a newer card. This card actually got printed in Breakthrough, and then it got rotated in the very first rotation, and then it got brought back for Winter War for the sole reason that it said Alpine on the card, and they were bringing back Alpine cards. Yeah, there's only ever been, I think, off the top of my head, I can only think of 3 cards that have ever synergized with this. One was terrible, and it's sitting in rotation. One is Jet Prototype, which was too good to want to play this garbage. And the third one was so utterly broken that they killed the deck. Because Mountain Rifles actually did see a ton of competitive play for a brief window of time in a deck called Casino Jagro, which I don't need to go into the whole history of right now, but let's just say the 34th Infantry, the 1K 2/2 for Japan,
God,
that draws and discards the top card of your deck at the end of turn, used to say remove the top card of your deck at the end of your turn. which meant you played that on turn 1, and you had about a 1 in 11 to pull a free 5/5 on turn 1. And then on turn 2, you had about a 1 in, like, 15 to pull a free 6/6 on turn 2.
Yeah. I
And
forgot that part, yeah.
that was a real competitive deck, which got absolutely, utterly buried for a very good reason, and that was one of 2 cards that were moved from the top of your deck at the time, and they reworked one of them, and the other one was not good enough. I will also say none of the cards that were moved from deck were ever Soviets. Soviets have never had a card that removes a card from your deck.
Nope.
So, yeah, I don't know why this card was printed. I don't know why this card was brought back from rotation the first time. And yeah, no other thoughts about this card. This is one of the few cards that I'm fine leaving instead of a covert card.
Yeah, fair. All right. I mean, I think we're mostly on 35th, so long, see ya. Okay, this is the 392nd Rifles. This is a 4-cost, 1-op cost, 3/5. Limited card, and it says, give units you deploy +2 attack and deal them 1 damage. Becomes veteran when it has dealt 4+ damage. And then the veteran version says that your damaged units have +2 attack. I think it's fairly obvious what this was trying to do. I don't think it ever actually massively did it. I don't think it was ever... At least in my testing, this just fell into juice not worth squeeze. There were better ways to build decks that were using similar cards that might synergize with this in some way. Hell, there were veteran decks that didn't massively care about this, and veteran decks were never that good. Although I did run this when I did... for a community vote challenge, run a community-built veterans deck that one of my Discord members built, and my Discord voted to make me play as one of only 3 decks that I was allowed to play to get to Field Marshal. That's its claim to fame with me. I went through an entire season where I was forced to have this in one of the 3 decks that were the only decks that I was allowed to play. Anyway, someone else go.
I actually quite like this card. Not that I don't think this card is good in any like actual competitive decks, but I really enjoyed this card in draft. What I really liked about this card is that it was difficult to trade into. So if you played 392nd and then you played one other unit, it is now dealt 1 damage. Which means if your opponent attacks into this and doesn't kill it with the first attack, it veterans on their turn and turns back into a 5/5. So it actually just makes it really difficult to remove for your opponent relatively early on into the game. The issue with this card is 9 times out of 10 you don't want to veteran it, which makes it actually difficult to use. Because you don't want to attack into things with it, because then you veteran and then you lose the effect. Because the trigger is, generally speaking, much better than the passive effect in its veteran version. So, like, I see what they were doing with this card, and I don't think this card is bad. I just think it didn't have the pieces around it to work. And also, this is kind of like the engine of a damage deck, which probably needed to be like a 2-cost 2/4 rather than a 4-cost 3/5, something like that, just to make it easier to combine with other things around like turn 5 or 6.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair too. Core, anything on the 392nd?
Yeah, I actually quite like this design as well. The biggest thing for me was it just needed to be add or deploy. I think that was like the biggest thing holding it back, because we got scouting party back as well. Like this with scouting party, if it hit on add as well, would have been so nice for like a Soviet Japan self-damage deck. But unfortunately, that's just not the case.
Yeah, I do think it is worth noting. This is the kind of design space and idea that I think is cool to explore. It is as you guys are pointing out, it is just an interesting effect and text that you could play around with and build around in a way that might make a... I know people are always busy talking about the big meta decks, but I have a feeling that if you found a way to give it some synergy, this could make an interesting tier 2 kind of fun to play around with deck. And I'm never against that. But yeah, it's gone for now. It might come back. It might get some support. Yes, the 60th Cavalry Regiment. This has had moments. This is a 2-cost, 1-op cost, 2/4 infantry that is special. It is special primarily because of its text, which says players can only give one order each turn. There have been times when this card has been able to shut down certain decks. This card was heavily teched during both commando catastrophes by people who didn't want to deal with the commando problem for obvious reasons. I'm curious as to, I'm going to come to Core for his thoughts, and then I'm going to come to JKing at the end, because I'm curious as to whether there's any prehistory beyond what I happen to know about this, which is that its biggest claim to fame for me was a tech card to make Commandos players sad. Core, I'm assuming that at some point, like me, you have included this index to make Commando players miserable?
I have not, because this versus Commandos, in theory, very good, but in reality, it just eats one of the 3 duresses they were running. so frequently didn't do anything anyway. I am sad to see it go, though, because it's a really interesting card. This is one of the other hate bears I was talking about, similarly to the 125th Rifle Regiment that we're losing. It's funny because I was actually looking at 125th and 60th recently and thinking, God, I wonder if I could just build a deck of nothing but hate bears. So I guess I'm gonna have to do that sooner rather than later. Some Soviet Britain hate bears with Black Watch as well, just really torture my opponents. But yeah, no, it's an interesting card, very much a tech card. We're not really we haven't been in order heavy metagames all that often. A lot of decks are pretty, I don't know, it's a pretty even split between like removal orders and just bodies. So plus it dies to a lot of things. It dies to Raiding Brigade and stuff, which is not great either. But like a 2-cost 2/4 is like fine. Yeah, it's an interesting card. It's an interesting line of text, but I don't think it's ever been, at least in my experience, in my limited experience, it's not been all that good.
Well, let's go to virtually unlimited experience by comparison.
Yeah, so the 60th Cavalry came out as a 4-cost 3/6 ambush, with the same text, and it was interesting. People tried it out a little bit. The big issue was just ambush is not a good keyword against, like, for a control deck against aggro. If it was just released as a 4-cost 3/6 guard with this text, I think it would have been amazing and like a staple in Soviet control, but they released it with ambush instead. And then they one day looked at this relatively underused card and decided to rework it. And instead of moving ambush to guard to make it playable in control, they made it a 2-cost 2/4, which makes it largely unplayable in control unless it's just like an absolute call-out tech card. However, makes it like playable in just like a board-centric, relatively aggressive deck that's just kind of dumping stuff on the board. But that deck doesn't really exist, unfortunately. So I think they like largely made the card worse by changing it to a 2-cost 2/4, despite beginning the power creep of 2-cost units being 2/4s. Because no 2-cost unit was a 2/4 other than the one that takes double damage, until 60th Cavalry, and then shortly after they buffed 845th to be a 2/4 as well.
Yeah.
Which is just like power creeping 2 drops, which is not that fun. But yeah, it's a very interesting keyword. I'm not a huge fan of cards that shut down things that shut down specific decks just entirely, but they can still give one order a turn. So if that first order silences this or suppresses this or kills this or whatever, then they can continue doing whatever they want. So that's fine. But yeah, it's an interesting card. Sad to see interesting cards leave the pool.
Yeah, we've seen a few of those. Right, where am I at? We're at 60th? Yes, we're doing. Yeah, here we go. We are at the Soviet 85mm D44 field gun. This is a special card. It is a 6-cost, 2-op cost, 4/3 artillery. and it has units damaged by the card, and their adjacent units get pinned. Pass. Haven't really seen it see play, because in any deck that cares about pinning, you're playing Japan Britain or Britain Japan, at least in my experience, and it's a bit indifferent. I mean, it's a 4-cost artillery, a 4-attack artillery, I suppose, which is, quite hard hitting. I don't know. Anyone got any major thoughts on the 85mm?
Yeah, I'm actually very upset about this. I have an obsession with a very specific card, and this I will forever. I'll never again be able to.
I'm going to interrupt briefly because I wish Core could see because I can see mine and JKing's faces right now, and Core can't. But for a minute, both of us were like. You can see us leaning in, go, what? I think I know where you're going, and I suspect JKing thinks he does now. Yeah, but anyway, carry on.
Never again will I be able to lock my opponent's board down for 3 consecutive turns by playing frontal defense on this. I'm so gonna miss playing frontal defense on this. Frontal defense with this is so funny. It does the critical damage supply shortage thing, but way more expensive and way less efficiently. And also just playing this in the support line, and if your opponent attacks into it, it just pins their entire front line. It was like not bad. I mean, it was bad, but like it was at least funny.
I can't believe I never thought of this combined with frontal defense. Cause I did the reckoning with the frontal defense. The field gun was completely not on my radar. I've never seen anybody do that. But yeah, that sounds pretty fun.
I have a funny feeling I know what I'm doing later. Honestly, again, even two of us right here, never even occurred to me until you were talking, and I was like, oh, is that what he mean? Oh. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah, the art on this card is beautiful, and I have many memories. With this card being from Classic, I have many memories of taking this in Draft or getting it randomly off like a Euro Factories or something, and then my opponent completely throwing the game because they forget that it counts when they attack into it, not just when you attack with it.
Yeah, because it is damaged by, not attacked by. But yeah. Anyway, that was definitely entertaining. And a learning experience for two people who I hadn't had pegged for the learning experience on this one. Let's move on to the 95th Rifle Regiment. This is a 2-cost, 1-op cost standard Soviet infantry. It's 2/2, and it has deployment. Deal 1 damage to a unit near HQ. Self-damage, blah blah. I am Ledun. Anyone got any...
Yeah. This card got buffed to this current version a bit after self-damage became a deck, and people tried it out, definitely, for like a window of time. And then it went from like 4 of very quickly down to like a 2 of, 1 of, to most people didn't play it, but it wasn't that normal to see maybe like 1 or 2 of in certain self-damage builds. Unfortunately, just self-damage has plenty of ways to damage itself and plenty of ways of dealing 1 damage, and this is not really one of them that you need to play. The only funny tidbit I have is before this card was buffed to its current version, this card was a 5-cost 7/5 infantry that was deployment deal 1 damage to your HQ. It didn't do the ping to an enemy unit. It only pinged your own unit for a 5-cost 7/5, because a 5-cost 7/5 infantry was considered above rate at that time, that it needed a drawback.
Nowadays, they draw you 3 cards.
Yeah. Okay then. Right. Unless Core has anything to add, let's roll on. Now I am going to be unashamedly sad to see this go, if only because this is one of the most unloved tanks. This is the BT7. this is a standard Soviet tank. It is a 2-cost, 0-op cost, 2/2. Yes, really, I'm done. No, it doesn't have blitz or heavy armor or a deployment effect or the BT7. It's a cute little tank that just sits there wishing that it did something other than be a 2/2. Yeah, I have played this.
35D.
Yeah, I actually have played this in a few little meme fun decks that I played around with where I was just exploiting the life out of 0-op cost for efficiency. But every single time, I just wish it had something else. Not Blitz, clearly. 1939, if you're watching this. Of all of the things to do, this is not the one you paint the Go Faster stripes on. That would be stupid. But do something with it. Anyway, Core, you were nodding away. I have a feeling that you like me have looked at this lovingly, wishing it could do something better.
I have tested this in like some very specific like hyper aggro decks along with the T80. The 3/2 op that deals like 2 damage to you when it dies. So I am sad to see this go. I had done some like testing with Soviet or with Germany Soviet tank decks using like contest doctrine with this because 0-op on tanks is really, really powerful.
Yep.
Especially on cheap tanks. So it's sad to see this go in that sense, but I mean, it's always been like just on the verge of me like wanting to play with it, but it's just never. If this was a 2/3, I'd be a lot more interested in playing it. But as it is, it's not quite good enough.
Yeah, JKing.
Yeah, I basically have the same stuff to say. I've tried it out in fringe aggro decks, and it's been fine. And yeah, if they just made it a 3/2 or a 2/3 or 1-op cost, then obviously that would be power creeping, but it would be looked at maybe.
I mean, come on.
It's hard for vanilla units to be played.
I was going to say, come on, if any card is deserving of a bit of power creep love, surely it has to be the BT7. It's such a sad-looking little thing. On to a tank that is somewhat less sad-looking. This is the KV-1 1941. This is another Soviet rotating elite. This is the 6-cost, 2-op cost, 3/6 heavy armor 1 that says each time the enemy draws a card, deal 2 damage to the enemy HQ. I don't think there are any new players who have not at least once died to being irritated to death by this thing, because at times it can be very, very punishing. I don't have a massive amount to say because I'm not overly fussed with this in the game or out of the game, beyond the fact that I don't necessarily think it needs to be out of the game for any major reason at the minute. I'm curious as to whether Core has indeed found that occasionally when you're first learning the game, you do have moments where this can be awkward.
I'm probably going to get pilloried for this opinion. And I mean, JKing, you can correct me because I'm probably going to be like way off base with this, but I think this card is so unbelievably overrated. I think this is a card that has been put into Soviet control and like just Soviet decks in general for so long that people stopped questioning whether or not they should still be running it in Soviet control and Soviet decks in general. It's a card that I have started, like I had started recently cutting from decks, and I have found it better without it. Now, obviously, there are certain decks like this with Victory Banners is obviously hilarious, and it's well worth playing just for that interaction. Just turning an entire board of things into KVs is hilarious. But I think, I don't know, it's just dealing 2 damage every time your opponent draws a card is fine. It matters in very specific matchups. But in the current metagame, when you have decks like Germany that are just going to Alpenfestung, they have like 10 million ways of removing this. Against aggro, it's not going to matter. It's just SS36 with heavy armor 2-op. It's going to be stuck in your support line for the entire game anyway. I just think there's like much more impactful things you could be running. So I mean, similar to yourself, Bear, I'm like indifferent as to whether or not this is in the game or not. I just think that people have been playing this when they potentially shouldn't be anymore.
I mean, just in case
JKing's
about to disagree, I should point out I'm with Core. I think this card is painfully overrated in control decks. And now JKing does some magical thing where he educates us as to why we're both very wrong.
I don't think it is that overrated, but I completely agree that it is overrated. I've been cutting it from most of my Soviet control decks for basically since 2022. Like, it's not been an auto include for me for 3+ years of building Soviet control now. There are times where I think it is worth running. Specifically, if there's like decks that draw a lot of cards in a single turn that you want to be good into, or if you're running any type of force draw, like for a while, Phony War was in Soviet control of Soviet France. So you just run that because sometimes you play KV, they can't answer it for a turn, and then you play Phony War and burn them out. And also, I've been putting it back in more now that Victory Banners is in the game because I love Victory Banners. I think it's really good.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think there's use cases for it. I think also if there's a way to build Soviet Italy control, like a quasi burn deck where you just run 2 Machis and you run 2 I'm blanking on the name, but the new 3-drop, the little
Cobra.
Cobras.
Little Cobras, yeah.
And you run like Attack on the Colonies that can go face, and you run a couple other cards that can basically just like hit the opponent in the HQ. And then you run like KV, and basically you're a control deck, but you're putting on a bit more HQ pressure than other versions of Soviet control, and I think it's fine in that. But I do agree, I think most people building Soviet control are not critical, like don't think critically enough about, should I put KV in this deck? Am I playing a grindy, slow control deck that front formation is my win condition? If so, do not run KV.
Yeah.
So yeah, I largely agree with you, almost entirely.
Yep, that seems fair. Yeah.
And actually, I'm so focused on whether or not you should play it, I kind of forgot that it's being rotated.
Sort of why we're here.
I'm shocked that this card is being rotated, because in my mind, this was one of the cards from the base set that is iconic to, like, it's one of like the 2 or 3 iconic elites for Soviets, like similarly to Comet, but unlike Comet, I don't feel like KV is problematic or drastically limiting in design space. I just thought like this was just one of those cards that's just kind of always gonna sit in standard because it's just one of those safe crafts for new players as a base elite that's good. I think Cossacks is the elite that all the new players get, which maybe should be changed one day because Cossacks realistically is going to be power crept by the end of the year. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of shocked to see it go. I hope it's not gone for too long. But circling back to a sort of earlier point, the KV is gone and the 125th is gone, which is the guard that deals the 1 damage when they draw a card.
Yeah.
And this is once again just a sign of them rotating these tiny little bundles of cards that do similar things. And I want to say, I totally get wanting to make the game slightly simpler and more approachable for new players. So, like, you know, it's better to completely remove mobilize rather than have like 1 or 2 mobilize keywords that like a new player is going to see and hover over and try to understand. Same with like pincer or alpine or covert. Like, you don't need all of these keywords, but when they draw a card, deal damage to their HQ is not a keyword, and it is not difficult to understand at all. It doesn't make the game more complicated by having these cards in the game, or at least one of these cards. Like, they could have kept KV and rotated 125th, or kept 125th and rotated KV. You don't have to rotate 2 cards that have similar text at the same time to make it simpler. You're just removing options from the pool in deck building, which is just not particularly good, in my opinion.
Yeah, I do have to say, and I sort of, it might be the last time I do this, mostly because we're wrapping up Soviets, but it sort of, as the new player advocate, it kind of bothers me that this is going and Betzista is staying, because this is, one of you, I think, JKing, one of you said it, this is a good safe craft for a new player, because it's never a bad card. Like, no, you're not going to, like, fundamentally build around it, but you can craft this or open this in a pack and it can sit in your collection and you will have times that you can use it, as opposed to something like Betzista, which at this point, unless you're super building around, is... Oh, I know I'm getting ranty, but like, it baffles me a little bit why you'd feel the need to, like you say, remove both of them, and particularly this one, because this is just a nice elite to own, because sometimes it's good.
Yeah, I mean, there's like several other elites that they could have gotten rid of, like you said, the covert guy, the elite guy, or they could have got rid of like 6 airborne, the T-34 spawning 6-cost guy, which is seeing 0 play anywhere right now. There were so many other things that they could have gotten rid of that are like much less evergreen per se.
You could have even gotten rid of a card that still sees like a fair amount of play, like Naval Brigade, where it's like, it's not going to be the end of the world for Soviet control. It's probably a similar impact to Soviet control as KV, but KV is, you can run in basically any deck or archetype for Soviets if you have a small collection. Like, you could arguably just fit it into basically any Soviet deck and it's going to be fine. Whereas like something like Naval Brigade is a bit more hard to use in certain archetypes and requires a bit more deck building around it, a bit more forethought in using it. Yeah. Just
anyway,
choice.
That was just when JKing was making his comment about ease and accessibility. It got me started on the new player rant. Right, last Soviet card. We're at the end of Soviets, guys. We've made it. No one died. This is another T-34. This is the T-34-85. Again, base set card. This is a 5-cost, 2-op cost standard tank. 5/5 heavy armor 1. When the opponent targets T-34-85 with an order, draw a card. Sorry. When the opponent targets T-34-85 with an order, draw a card. God, that's a mouthful. But yes, it gives you some proc card draw. I mean, is it seeing play? No, not really. But again, are there other things? BTN that we could have rotated, and this could have just hung around as a body that could kind of sit there and maybe occasionally see play. But I mean, I don't think it's the end of the world, and I think it's clear that T-34s are just not taking off. But I don't know. I am a little bit sad to see this go. Plus, I really quite like the art on this card more than I probably should. This is one of those cards I can just sit and look at the art for. But anyway, someone take over before I just turn into an art critic.
This card is like one of the beasts of like draft and pauper formats. Not only just because 5-cost 5/5 heavy armor 1 is good stats, but also just the removal and use of orders becomes less efficient. You often have to double up to remove threats, and also card draws are much harder to come by. So this being a threat that might draw you 2 cards, is just very, very good in those formats. Obviously, it's completely unplayable competitively. And the only other thing I'll say is, in the back of my mind for a long time, I've had the possible buff idea for this card to make it whenever it is targeted by an order by anyone. So like you could play this with like USAS and like cycle through a bunch of cards or something like that. I don't know. It wouldn't be good, but it would be kind of fun.
Yeah, it'd just be interesting. Cool.
Yeah, no thoughts. Similar to JKing, just beast and draft. That's kind of my experience with this card. It's kind of close in like when you're in deck building where you're looking at 5-drops and you're like, wow, this is like one of the better 5-drops that Soviets have. I might play this if it was like a bit better, if it was like a 6/6 or was a little bit more proactive, but it's just not quite playable enough to justify a deck slot outside of like dedicated T-34 stuff, and even then I don't think it even belongs in dedicated T-34 stuff. I think there's much better T-34s. So yeah, just mainly just a big draft card and just a neat design that just isn't competitively oh my god, words, Jesus, isn't competitively viable.
Yeah, it's fair.